So let me welcome all of you. We are thrilled to have two former members of Congress, Democrat, two former Republican members of Congress, a couple of days after the election. A lot to process and digest. And joining us, Representative Cheri Bustos, Democrat from Illinois, Representative Reid Ribble, Republican from Wisconsin, Democrat Mark Schauer from Michigan, and Congressman Fred Upton, also from the great state of Michigan. So, Congressman Upton, let me begin with you and get your sense as the returns were coming in Tuesday evening. What was your sense of the numbers and especially battleground state Michigan?
Well, Mark and I are both from Michigan, and we knew it was going to be a battleground state. I think that most of our voters are really glad that it's over. They're inundated with the ads, the radio and TV, and our mail carriers. They're really muscle bound now. They were delivering boatloads of flyers from all the. We had a Senate race, we had obviously the presidential race of the entire state house was up, so a lot of mail. But Michigan is a very diverse state, fractured Democratic side. You had the Teamsters that were neutral. You had the UAW with a lot of the rank and file for Trump, and the leadership obviously was for Harris. But you also had the Gaza issue, which, Jill Stein was double digits in a couple of areas. Obviously, she had no presence in the race, but she took a lot of votes from the Dems. And that's why Trump outperformed in virtually every county, as Harris underperformed in virtually every county over the last couple of different cycles. So, as I sat through, and I've always been a numbers person, I knew from the get-go. I watched Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina. One of those three had to break for Harris for her to win, no matter what else happened. So really by 11 o'clock, I turned off the TV. I went to bed. I said, it's over. And of course, it was later on.
Congressman Schauer, let's stay in Michigan because the interesting dynamic in the battleground state where you live is that Donald Trump winning Michigan, winning the blue wall, but a lot of ticket splitting when it came to the Senate race and the Democrats holding that seat with the retirement of Senator Debbie Stabenow, Alyssa Slotkin, now the new Republican senator. How do you explain that?
Democrat. Well, I think to Fred's point, I mean, Michigan is an independent state. I would say typically slightly leaning blue. But Trump, this was a Republican wave election in Michigan. I think Michigan is, mirrored what happened across the rest of the country. Every county saw a shift toward Donald Trump and the Republicans. I mean, we have statewide education board elections for major universities, and those are on the partisan ballot. Folks don't know who these people are. Typically, Republicans almost completely swept those seats. So for Alyssa Slotkin to win, I mean, that's a testament to her as a candidate and her campaign. But her win was incredibly narrow, one of the last to be called. There's still a couple that are out there. But I think it goes to the fact that, as she did in a very tough mid-Michigan congressional seat, she was able to appeal to independents and Republicans. And, her first TV ad was to brand herself as bipartisan, having worked for both President Bush, George W. Bush, and President Obama in their White Houses. And in Mike Rogers, Fred and I both served with Mike. I served with him in the state legislature, and we did in Congress. Incredibly formidable. So it's a tribute to Slotkin. I mean, we saw it was so close because, the transgender attacks, the, immigration, inflation, the economy. I mean, those hit Slotkin hard. I'm sure they're wiping their brows, and their polling probably showed them with a bigger lead than what they ended up with. But look, I think the Democratic Party my party has to take stock. I mean, we just misunderstood and the electorate. that it was about the economy. There were, the culture wars. And the last thing I'll say is, look, this is part of a global shift to the right that we're seeing. And I read a piece about how the U.S. saw one of the smallest anti-incumbent shifts. And what Slotkin survived, just to close here, is an anti-incumbent wave. And I think we need to understand that and grapple with that. But she's one of the few survivors because of the campaign and the resources that she was able to muster.
And I want to come back to your earlier point in terms of the larger picture. And interestingly enough, what happened in Pennsylvania, because that state flipped Bob Casey losing to Dave McCormick,
Right.
very different from
Right.
what happened in Michigan and Wisconsin. Representative Bustos, let's turn to Illinois, because the other interesting dynamic, when you look at the returns from blue wall states and blue states like New Jersey and Illinois, even though Kamala Harris won, not by the percentage that many people expected. What happened there?
Well, to the point that Mark just made, we are seeing a shift in the entire nation, a center-right shift. And I think it is a huge wake-up call. It is alarm bells. It is a million alarm fire drill that Democrats better wake up to. And look, I was a Democrat. I am a Democrat I served in a Trump district, and I was in a district in downstate Illinois. I'm not from Chicago. I'm not from Chicagoland. I'm not from the suburbs. I live in a small town, but I was able to survive. I've never lost an election because you gotta understand people in parts like ours. All the people you have on this conversation today, Steve. We are all middle of the country, and for Mark and I and our party, this is a wake up call. What happened? Look, I'm married to a guy who was 40 years in law enforcement. And I was running the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee during COVID, during George Floyd, during, the kind of the emergence of really the growing woke movement. And it killed Democrats in parts like we're from. And so this is a wake up call. I think our party needs to just start fresh from scratch. And one other note, this will not be popular, but let's take a look at our consultants. Where are they based? What are they all in Alexandria, Virginia? How many come from the center part of our country and really understand the voters that we are going to have to win back? It is now the Trump party. It's no longer the grand old party. Our party has the Democratic Party seem to go farther and farther and farther left. And that is not a popular place to be. And look, I come from a political family. And my dad, who was the chief of staff to a U.S. senator during my college years and my adult years, his phrase in our family was always, first you got to win. Now, you got to win ethically, but first you got to win. You don't govern if you don't win. And we as a party, the party ought to be about winning. And that's how you get things done, where you can talk about your own values. But we are muted now. All levers of power in Washington, D.C. are under the Trump wing. And, we'll see how the next couple of years go. Look, we just finished an election. Who knows what's going to happen in the midterms? But we're already looking ahead to the midterms and figuring out how are we more successful then.
And by the way, in case you're interested, we are 1,460 days until the next presidential election. So who's counting? Reid Ribble, let me pick up on Representative Bustos' comment, because we have seen really a transformation. Many are calling this a realignment of your party. You look at the numbers, Donald Trump did better among every group, every demographic, and Kamala Harris did not outperform Joe Biden in any county across the country. So what's happening with the Republican Party, now the party of Donald Trump?
Yeah, I might disagree a little bit with what Cheri and Mark said, in that I don't think this is a shift to the right necessarily. I think we are in a global populist move, and populism appeals to left and right people. So, for example, Donald Trump talks very much in the same manner that Bernie Sanders does when he talks about restrictive tariffs and punishing big corporations and some of his anti-free market language. And Donald Trump appealed to the unions in a way that the GOP typically does not. And so there is a coalition government of left and right-wing populists being drawn into this populist leader in the form of Donald Trump. And so whether the traditional classic liberal GOP that believes in limited government, free markets, free trade can reestablish itself, count me as a skeptic. I think there's a space for it, but I think we're looking more like the 1850s when it comes to political parties, and that we might actually see these parties break into. Fred talked about how fractured the Democratic Party is. If you look at the races in Wisconsin, it was down ballot votes that were taken by Jill Stein and Kennedy that actually cost Harris the win in Wisconsin because it was within 30,000 votes. And so you've got a fractured left and a fractured right. And I don't know that these traditional Democratic and Republican parties will ever reform. They will break apart and create new parties. I don't know what they're going to call themselves or how they're going to position themselves, but there is a political realignment taking place. It's not happening just here in the U.S., but globally, and we're just going to have to watch and see where it lands. And I think the big story out of Wisconsin, quite frankly, is the fact that down ballot independence changed the dynamics in the state pretty dramatically.
Some fascinating insight from all of you. I'm going to answer my own question first, and then Fred Upton, I'm going to turn to you because I want to get your sense of, you were in bed by 11 o'clock, so you've had a chance since then to process the results. But the one thing that surprised me the most, I thought that Donald Trump could get above 270 electoral votes. I did not think he would win the popular vote. I was wrong. So that was my surprise of the night. Fred Upton, if you would take one aspect of the results, whether the presidential race or the down ballot races, what surprised you the most?
Well, clearly it was that Harris was, she lost every county. I mean, she lost every county worse than Biden. I mean, when you look at those, all the networks did this. They picked a bunch of different counties, but it was 100%. She underperformed Biden. That was the biggest surprise to me. I mean, we knew that the 7 swing states that were in play, I guess you could say the other, and there was some chatter about either candidate might be able to swing all 7. But I don't think anyone really thought that was going to happen. But, it was her failure to deal with inflation, the price of eggs, the price of milk, the price of bread. I'm going to the store a little bit later this morning, and I remember what a loaf of bread used to cost 5-6 years ago. And, you're not going to get a loaf of bread for less than $4 or $5 today. That's what people remember. I mean, they watch the price of gasoline, but the price at the grocery store is what people really remember. And when she didn't have an answer to what are you going to do different than Biden back in August or whenever it was, and then you saw the trend lines that as high as 30% of the voters actually decided in early September how they were going to vote. That was a message that really prevailed.
Reid Ribble, what about you? What surprised you, one thing, as you assess the results from Tuesday?
Yeah, what surprised me the most? I actually thought that Harris was going to be the likely winner, but just really, really by a thin margin. But I also did believe that it was possible for Donald Trump to run the table. I think what surprised me in a positive way, Steve, was that the election counting and getting results in pretty quickly without a lot of conflict. I think that's a net plus for democracy. And so I was surprised by how fast the states tabulated votes and got them reported. It was very encouraging, quite frankly.
I agree. No hanging chads in 2024. So we all remember what happened in 2000. Representative Bustos, one thing that surprised you?
I thought Donald Trump finished incredibly weak. His last week on the campaign trail was just, in my view, was just disastrous. Where he talks about if you want to go after him, you got to go through the mainstream press, and that's okay with him. to just weirdness and strange things that were uttered, and offensive things that were uttered. And it just seemed to get worse and worse and worse the closer it got to November 5th. The Democrats all thought that we had a really strong ground game. So everybody you talked to in the Harris campaign said we've got a really strong ground game. And so I thought that that would help. And then lastly, I really thought that the women vote was for a lot of reasons, as the only woman on in this conversation right now. I really thought that was going to help put Harris over the top. So I guess my surprise was I thought that Harris was going to win. I thought it would be very, very close, but I thought she was going to win. And I guess secondly, the conversations that I had with the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee was that we were going to be able to take out 11 incumbent Republicans, and that we would win back the majority. And it doesn't look, I know there's still a few races out, but that doesn't appear to be happening either. So, it's that's more than just one thing, but I guess that's my assessment of the evening.
Well, let me stay with you on that point. I have a daughter who is a Navy pilot. She phoned me last night. She was rather distraught because she said, "Do you think we'll ever have a woman president?" I said, "Yeah, when you run for office." But there are a lot of people now asking that. There are a lot of people asking that question because now twice the Democrats have nominated very capable, qualified women, regardless of how you view their politics. They both were up to the job. They both lost. How do you answer that?
Well, I will tell you this. I'm on a lot of different text chains with current members of Congress, with folks in the Democratic Party. I've got a lot of different groups, and I've got a very close group of friends. We all came in at the same time in Congress, and we text almost nonstop. I mean, it's really a blow. In 2016, I think it was just a huge surprise. I think Donald Trump was surprised at his victory in 2016. But we really thought that with a guy like Donald Trump, with his multiple indictments, when he was found liable for sexual assault, I want to make sure that was the right word, but the New York case, and the comments that he's made about women, it's like, how do we not win with, to your point, Steve, a capable candidate? I think hopefully it gets more back to the messaging that Fred was talking about, that we were off on the messaging. And, but no, I feel the same way as your daughter. It's like, I'm 63 years old. Am I ever going to see a woman in the White House? And it's upsetting on a personal level, for our gender, for the female gender, it is upsetting.
I'm reminded the movie Wicked is coming out for the holiday season, and the song is Defying Gravity. And look, Donald Trump has defied political gravity as a 3-time nominee and now president, the first time since Grover Cleveland. Mark Schauer, what surprised you the most? One thing.
Well, I think bottom line, how the presidential campaign, and again, this was kind of a continuation. I think Democrats have to face this of the Biden candidacy and campaign, and how Democratic consultants and campaigns, by and large, just whiffed and missed the mood of the electorate. To Reid's point, sort of this global realignment that's going on. We ran sort of status quo campaign, and that's not where voters were. And and I think the second thing is, I think this is a learning. Cheri talked about women voters. I think we have to stop thinking about voting blocks as monolithic. I heard a NPR story about the Latino vote, and we talked about this earlier, how Harris lost ground with every demographic group, women, voters of color, et cetera. And so I think, I thought the Harris campaign had momentum, but I think, look, we were drinking our own Kool-Aid, and just totally missed. And I'm not surprised, but it is an awakening for me. And Cheri, to your point, this is an alarm bell. We need to do a reset and really step back and listen and to the voters and what they just told us.
But Congressman, to your point, and again, this was an election unlike no other. You have to go back to 1968 when you have a sitting president withdrawing from the race. A lot of finger pointing. Did Joe Biden stay in the race too long? Should there have been a primary? Did that hurt Kamala Harris?
Yep.
She didn't have what I call the spring training of a primary
Sure.
to really hone her message. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as I think about this, and I really admire and respect the comments of my colleagues here. One, I think any number of Republican candidates could have won this election. So this was, Donald Trump is the personification of this populist Republican MAGA party. And I'm not sure if there's a Democratic candidate, at least those that have been in the conversation, that could have won. I'm thinking, maybe Joe Manchin, who I guess is an independent, or someone, an outsider or something like that. But I just think this is an inflection point. I think Republicans need to be careful too about not over imbibing in their Kool-Aid either. But I just think this is the voters just told us something, and I think all parties would benefit. All parties would benefit by listening to what they just told us.
Good advice. Let me just remind those who are watching on this Zoom call, we're talking to 4 former members of Congress, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, Cheri Bustos from the great state of Illinois, Reid Ribble from Wisconsin, Mark Schauer from Michigan, Fred Upton also from Michigan. Let's talk about the 119th Congress. You're all members of the Congressional Study Group. And so, Congressman Upton, let me begin with you. It looks like you're going to have the trifecta, the House, the Senate, and the White House. What can we expect?
Well, I think so, but you know what? There's still a major hurdle here. This Congress isn't done yet. Maybe good thing, maybe bad thing. But they come back in a couple of weeks and they have this thing called the continuing resolution, or the CR, that expires on December 20th. They have leadership elections that are occurring as early as next week in the Senate. So we have a new Senate Majority Leader, and real race between Thune and Cornyn, I think, are the 2 favorites. But in the House, you're going to have leadership races as well. And they are the ones that are going to have to strike the deal for another CR to go, who knows how long. Is it going to go to March? Is it going to go to the end of the fiscal year and sort of get it off Trump's plate early on with his administration? You've got the Freedom Caucus. Their elbows are going to be on the table. They're going to want real cuts in lots of different things. And their vote for leadership for Mike Johnson, who's running, assuming that we keep the House, is going to be dependent upon how through this 5th ballots like we did with Kevin McCarthy 2 years ago. But they're a force that has to be dealt with. So how long that is going to go to sort of set the stage for the next Congress. But just to close, for Trump, it's going to be this theme that John Engler had for 12 years when he was governor here in Michigan: promises made, promises kept. Said he's going to do tariffs on day one. Said he's going to start deportation on day one. You got Musk coming in, and he's saying that he's going to find $2 trillion in cuts. You've got, we're not going to have payroll taxes anymore. I mean, it is an enormous 100-day agenda of things that they have to do, and they're going to be somewhat accountable to the voters, and certainly by the press and others that say, it's okay, it's day 40. Where is this agenda going? So it's going to be a little bit chaotic here at the start. That's for sure.
And oh, by the way, we have a national debt approaching $36 trillion. Cheri Bustos, from your standpoint on the Democratic side of the aisle, and to Congressman Upton's point, regardless of who has the majority in the House, we know it's going to be a slim single-digit majority for either party. What are your thoughts?
Well, think about how hard it is to govern when maybe whatever side has a 1, 2, 3 vote advantage. Think about life happening for members of Congress. Does somebody get sick? Does somebody have a tragedy in their family and can't be out in DC to vote? I mean, this will be a slim majority no matter what, and it looks right now as if the Republicans are going to take back the majority. The Democrats will stick with Jeffries as the number one, Catherine Clark is the number two, Pete Aguilar is the number three. That's not going to be debated. They're well liked, they're well respected, they're serious legislators. I think that you will find that they will hold out on any of their votes if Speaker Johnson needs their votes. He's going to have to compromise. And so I think we are just coming out of one of the least productive sessions of Congress in the history of our nation. And unless there's a willingness to compromise, then I think it's gonna be a tough go. Donald Trump is pretty darn lucky, though, if he's got a trifecta, if he ends up with a trifecta, and it looks like that's going to happen in Washington, D.C. The Republicans, again, the party of Trump, seem to listen to him. And so if he wants to deliver on his promises made, promises kept, I think we're in for a very changed country. And I think in 2 years, again, we'll see. But I think people are going to be alarmed by if he indeed keeps some of those promises. I think it's going to be a very disruptive couple of years.
Because in 2 years, again, it's never too early to start looking at the next election. As bad as the map was for the Democrats in the Senate, and it was very bad in 2024, it's almost equally as bad for the Republicans in 2026, correct?
Yeah, and you look at midterms, and that's when the party in power, who's in the White House, typically their party does not do well in the midterms. So, we could see a whole shift. And frankly, I think we can get a heck of a lot more done if we have government where we've got Democrats in charge in one of the houses and Republicans in the other, or, different in the White House. I think it's just we seem to moderate on our policies when that happens. But I think the next couple of years are going to be it could be alarming, in my opinion, if Donald Trump does indeed deliver on his promises.
This is such a great conversation. Thanks so much. Hey, Congressman Schauer. Oh, yeah, who wants to jump in?
I want to say, I looked at the map already of the senators that are up in 96. It's not as bad for it's, this time that the Dems had really 10 seats in play. It's not nearly as bad next time. It's almost a given, I think, in terms of looking at the races, but not nearly as many seats in play as there were this time, at least in the Senate.
Interesting point. Congressman Schauer, the other number that struck me on election night is that 13 million fewer voters to Kamala Harris over Joe Biden. 13 million fewer votes. Why?
Well, I think, go back to my broader point about how Democrats just missed what the voters cared about. And it was about the economy. Culture wars were a factor. I looked at turnout in Detroit, and Detroit turnout fell below even 2016 numbers. They certainly fell below what the Detroit city clerk was projecting. Why? Lack of enthusiasm for the Harris ticket, Trump's tactics, not only peeling off voters of color and other members of the so-called Democratic base, which we need to re-examine, or tactics to dissuade folks. Fred mentioned the Gaza issue, which was very real in Michigan. It just I've been there and suffered losses where turnout just collapsed. This wasn't a collapse, but I think we have to erase the term the silent Trump voter. They're not shy, they're not silent, they're out there. We just pollsters, consultants haven't figured out who they are. They're there, they vote. I think it was a combination of all of those factors why we saw the Trump gains and why Harris underperformed, and in some cases turnout didn't hit expectations in our base communities. That probably those percentages are similar in in Philadelphia and other, perhaps Milwaukee and, other cities that we counted on delivering the vote for the Democratic ticket.
Let me stay with you on that point, because if you look at the Trump messaging, you knew where he stand on immigration, economy, inflation, our role in the world, the war in Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East. Do you think that the Harris campaign outlined in that sense of clarity what she would do in her first 100 days if elected?
No, I don't I don't think so at all. And look, she failed to differentiate herself. Look, we have the luxury of hindsight here, but we're also pretty smart people and run tough campaigns. I said during the campaign that she should have made a market shift and separation from President Biden, whose unfavorable numbers were off the chart. He wouldn't have stood a chance of being reelected, and so I don't know that she could have done it as the seated vice president. I mean, I think she probably would have been accused. This is part of our problem by the Democratic base of treason at that point. But that's what would have been necessary for her to stake out, much more, moderate and sharply different positions on these issues. I mean, I saw, we had some battleground congressional seats. We won one. We lost. We lost Slotkin's. Michigan 7, which is part of my old former congressional district. Curtis Hertel, great candidate, sort of an establishment candidate, just didn't stand a chance on the Slotkin barely survived the transgender attacks. I mean, sort of the culture war issues, but we just did not have an answer. And candidly, it would have helped if we would have had that changed messaging and sort of permission from the top. Just was not there.
Congressman Ribble, I wanted to ask you about the policy agenda, the priorities for the Trump administration. One of the questions we're getting from one of our viewers and listeners is the impact of tariffs, which Donald Trump has talked about, how that would affect workers in this country and those who want to invest, those outside foreign companies in the U.S. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump is not bashful about wanting to use tariffs. I mean, he views it as a panacea. It's almost as if his slogan ought to be "Make 1930 Great Again." But the tariff situation, if people are concerned about what food costs, tariffs aren't going to help it. I mean, where do you suppose, if you live in Michigan, Illinois, or Wisconsin, where do you think fresh fruit and vegetables and things come from in January when it's 10 below zero? All those are imported, and if he puts a universal 20% tariff on any import, that cost is going to be shoved in, and people are going to, instead of spending $120 a week or whatever they're spending on groceries, it's going to be $140, and that's going to backfire pretty quickly. And so I think he's going to have a tough road to he'll go ahead and implement those, and he'll do it by executive fiat. I don't think he's going to have that compliant of a Congress. It's going to be very difficult with such a short, tiny majority in the House, if in fact they have a majority, for them to be able to do much of anything. And they give Trump some latitude, but not a lot, I don't think. And it only takes, if you get a 3-seat majority, that's not many people that have to break, and nothing happens, And so, and I think his position on immigration, at least he articulated a position. Kamala Harris never did. She said, I wouldn't do anything different than Joe Biden did. And so people see what they think and view as chaos at the border, that this is just going to continue. And Donald Trump came with a very strong message. On day one, we're going to start deporting all these illegal immigrants. It's easier said than done, obviously. And so he's going to have some trouble with his agenda. It's not all going to be just roses like he's telling people, but people wanted a change. They wanted a change on inflation, and they wanted a change on immigration. And those were, in my view, at least in Wisconsin, the driving forces there. And for whatever reason, I have no idea, it wasn't in the Harris campaign. She never articulated how she would deal with those things, other than saying, I'm going to stop get price gouging at grocery stores, which isn't much of an answer.
Let me open this up to any one of you on the issue of deportation, which is something that Donald Trump has talked about. The impact, well, first of all, the logistics of how you do something like that. Second of all, the cost of doing it. And thirdly, the impact it could have on those industries that rely on these workers to pick the strawberries, to work in the factories, to clean the bathrooms in hotels. Who wants to address that?
Can I just, I mean, after I left Congress, I became the chief executive officer of the National Roofing Contractors Association. I'm now retired, but the roofing industry is 70% immigrant workforce. And so the idea that they're just going to start picking people up off the street isn't what's going to happen. I think in reality, they'll pick each industry, somebody in ag, a couple of big players in ag and food processing, a couple of big players in construction, and they'll start doing targeted raids on bigger companies that'll get a big splash in the press and possibly even threaten some type of criminal injunction against the CEOs for using undocumented workers. And that's how they'll start to push it. It might restrain companies from hiring those that have come here without documentation, but it will also force a deeper black market economy of labor, which is what we really have going on right now. So it's not a very good solution, but I think that's going to be the tactic.
Anyone else want to respond to that?
Yeah. And actually, to play off of Reid's comment, Reid, how many of your neighbors who are not immigrants, who have entered our country illegal, how many of your neighbors would want those roofing jobs? Would you be able to fill those roofing jobs without immigrant labor?
No,
Right.
you can't. It's virtually impossible. There's not a single mom or dad in America today that when they look down in that bassinet to their newborn child, they say, "Wow, I hope you grow up to be a roofer." And this is the problem that we have. We've got a sociological problem where parents, quite rightly, would like to see something better, at least what they perceive as better for their own children. And so we're not raising children to go into the trades. And by the way, the unions have not always been friendly to immigration at all either, because they view it as downward pressure on wages.
Yeah, but Steve, I think that's the issue. The district that I represented has 20 or 10,000 family farms. Go to a dairy farm and see who's working at the dairy farm. Yep. Go to a hog farm, see who's working at that hog farm. Go to a poultry operation, see who's working. It's immigrant labor. And, I never asked the question, are you here legally or are you not here? But that is the labor. That is what is making our family farms operate. So this idea of rounding up and putting people in camps and taking them out of our country will be a disaster, not from a humanitarian perspective and from an economic perspective.
And not every country wants them back.
Yeah, that's a good point. Congressman Ribble, you're joking about kids growing up to be roofers. I think in your neighboring state of Minnesota, kids grow up maybe to become vice president. Of course, that did not work for Tim Walz. It did work for Walter Mondale and for Hubert Humphrey. But my serious question is your quick thoughts about Tim Walz, your neighbor in the Midwest, and whether it was the right decision or wrong decision by Kamala Harris to place him on the ticket.
Well, we're not looking through the lens of hindsight, right? If Harris had won, we would have thought it was a stroke of genius. And now that she lost, you say, boy, if she had just picked Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania or something like that.
But would that have made a difference?
I don't believe it would have. I think vice presidents are a net neutral or net zero type of influence on presidential campaigns. You're voting for the top of the ticket, and they're kind of for window dressing. I don't see them as having much pull through at all.
He's a good man. Schauer, Tim Walz is a good man.
Agreed.
Popular with our colleagues. And I was happy to see him picked just because he's a good guy. And so I agree with Reid, though. I don't think Shapiro would have put Harris over the top.
Yeah.
So Congressman Schauer, another question in the chat. How does your party get back to what had been the coalition, a working class individuals, blue collar union, which has been a traditional part of the Democratic Party, or has that train left the station, now the party of Donald Trump?
No, I don't think it has. I mean, again, this was still a very, very close election. Our country is extremely divided. But I think Democrats need to um, identify or some new leaders, a new set of leaders, or we need to provide the space for them to emerge. Whether it's someone or some that have been in the conversation, or new folks. And I think we need to have a process to go out and engage in an authentic way with voters we lost, a lot of focus groups and conversations. But I think it's first understanding that this phrase has been in the press a lot, and I think there's some accuracy that we've been the party of condescension. That if I hear another Democrat say that the voters are stupid, we need to close them in a room someplace. And I think we need to start respecting the electorate. And so we have to go through a process. I think there are new voices that, again, could be some seated governors or others in elected office, or, former officials. But I think we perhaps need to be some new organizations stood up, but quit treating the electorate as monolithic. Quit thinking we have the answers, which we obviously don't, that we're smarter than voters. We're not. I don't think a voter can be wrong. We say all the time, we need to meet voters where they are, and we really need to do that and do a hell of a lot of listening and understanding, trying to understand.
Representative Bustos, let me pick up on that point, because you're a Democrat. To your dad's point, maybe listen more, talk less. But the base of the party, the working class, if you can address that. And also, do you think in a campaign that was just 107 days, did Kamala Harris get an impossible hand?
Look, I am not going to point my finger at Kamala Harris. I think she worked hard. I think she showed up to a lot of places. She kept a positive attitude. When horrible names were thrown at her, she didn't take the bait. Again, I'm gonna throw out a couple things. As Democrats, as we look at our party, are we going to go back to the consultants who are coastal based, who didn't win? Are we going to keep going back to those same people? I'd start looking at people's win ratios. Who are the consultants who keep winning? Who are the consultants who get their polling right? Who are the consultants who have the right messaging in their mail or their digital strategy or their television ads? I live on the border of Wisconsin. I live on the border of Iowa. So I'm in that far northwest corner. And so I saw all of the ads for the Marionette Miller Meeks race. I saw the ads that were in Wisconsin because of the that being a swing district. They are so cookie cutter, and I'm sick of it. The other thing, look at the people who do commentary. They are people who, okay, no offense to anybody who's ever lost a race, but they're people who lost. I want to talk to people who win. I want to talk to Jared Golden. Every Democrat ought to be tapping into Jared Golden in Maine, who won against the odds. They should be talking to Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, who won out west against the odds. I want to talk to winners who don't always go along with the party line, but they won. And again, if we want to govern as Democrats, we better figure out how to win. And that means like a reckoning after this election that really was disastrous. We didn't win back the majority in the House. We lost the majority in the Senate, and we lost the White House. This is a reckoning, and it's time to ask really, really tough questions and get really smart people in the room, not losers.
Congressman Upton, let's turn to a couple of foreign policy issues. A lot of attention on what's going to happen with Ukraine, what will happen in the Middle East. I'll talk specifically about those in a moment. But what about our transatlantic alliances, NATO in particular, with a Trump administration? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Every one of those NATO countries is going to be pretty quick to come up with 2% of the funding of their GDP as a partner in that. Otherwise, Trump is really going to lay down the hammer. So I think And you saw that beginning to happen. I was meeting with a number of NATO officials 2-3 years ago when I was still in the Congress, and they got the message. We went to Denmark, we went to a number of places, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to be there." So that's going to happen. But certainly the mood in the Congress is we need to be part of that NATO coalition. We know that we're the strongest member there. No one's going to want to have that go away, but Trump will have some influence. I mean, who is he going to pick for his ambassador to NATO, his representative? I mean, if he sent the signal of not sending anyone, that would send an enormous signal. So we're going to still be a part of NATO, but those countries are going to contribute. There's no question about that, as they should. That was a nerve that Trump hit early on, but they've had their come to Jesus moment now. Their checkbook's going to be open.
Let me stay with you, Congressman Upton. What specifically about Ukraine? He said he would end the war in a day. Many people look at that saying, okay, that means he's going to give Putin carte blanche to take back some of that territory. On that front specifically, Ukraine, Russia, the U.S., what will happen?
Well, I was part of the Ukraine caucus. I was there a number of times. As a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, we actually had Zelensky on the Zoom with us. Very close to that situation. Trump said he can fix a lot of things. One of them was Ukraine. Well, we'll see. Putin, I saw this morning, is waiting for a call from Trump, not Putin calling Trump, but a call from Trump. So we'll see how that plays. But that is a huge issue that I have fear in my heart in terms of what it means, knowing that we were never going to send troops on the ground there. But we as part of a coalition, were part of the force that tried to blunt Putin's outreach into that area. We'll see what happens. It may be quickly accelerating. We'll see.
I want others to weigh in, but I can't let that statement go without getting you to explain fear in your heart over what?
Wait, say that again.
Your fear in your heart is over
fear
what?
Fear in my heart is that we'll throw in the white flag.
Reid Ribble, your thoughts? Foreign policy, NATO, Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Fred on NATO. I think the U.S. is a major player there. Trump has always talked about the other countries paying their fair share, as he describes it. And so I'm not as concerned about what the U.S. role with NATO is. I think that's going to stay the same. When it comes to Ukraine, Trump's got no magic potion here. It's kind of a lot of talk. The Ukrainians have proven they're going to fight for their country, and if we had been more willing to give them the capacity, they had all the will they needed to win. They just didn't have the capability because they didn't have the offensive weapons that they needed. And we had a fairly weak response when Russia took Crimea. And so we have a history there of letting Russia do what they want without really getting tough on them. And if we just kind of say we're not doing anything else for Ukraine, and Russia goes in and takes either a big chunk of it or all of it, you're sending the wrong message to President Xi on Taiwan, and we could just see a cascade of badness happen around the world on the foreign stage. And so I would hope that we continue with our support with Ukraine, but count me as a skeptic, because I'm not sure Congress is going to be able to get a Ukraine aid through the Congress right now.
Let me get our Democratic colleagues to weigh in. Mark Schauer, foreign policy in general, NATO, Ukraine, other areas.
I mean, it's hard to, we have, the first Trump term to use as a guide. I think we should be concerned about our place on the world stage and on the world order, and how we, stand up to Putin, how whether a two-state solution in the Middle East with a lasting peace is possible under President Trump. I mean, and I'm very concerned about Ukraine. To be crass, follow his advisors and their economic interests, and including the Trump family. And what, I think that's the best predictor. What is Elon Musk going to tell him to do? I read a piece about Musk actually caring about climate change. Maybe that will give us hope on that issue. So I think we should be worried, and I think there is as former members, there's a role for current members to really step up and weigh in. I mean, there are in the Republican Party, there are in my view, voices of reason there on Ukraine and other foreign engagement, and they have an opportunity, and I think they can have real influence over what the administration does, I think.
Cheri Bustos, by the way, your dad worked for which senator? I was curious. I meant to ask you that earlier.
Dixon, who had a long career in Illinois statewide
Sure.
politics, and then went on to the U.S. Senate. So I mean, this was look, my dad's been dead for 10 years. So I mean, this was when I was in college that my parents moved out to D.C. and he was a chief of staff.
Well, we all remember him. We're all old enough to remember. But on the serious issue of foreign policy and NATO, Ukraine, what are your thoughts?
I don't have anything else to add. I agree with what my former colleagues have said. I also agree that something good that I think Donald Trump did in his first term is talk about everybody paying their fair share. I think the American public expects that and doesn't think that the United States should be pay more than our fair share while other NATO countries are paying less than their fair share. I don't think that's too much to ask.
So I want to give each of you a chance to kind of offer some closing comments, but let me frame it in terms of the next Congress. And Cheri Bustos, will begin with you. If you could give some advice to Hakeem Jeffries and to Chuck Schumer, the House and Senate Democratic leaders in the next Congress, what would it be?
Try to work together. The American public is sick and tired of a do-nothing Congress. They're tired of the fighting, the prospects of government shutdowns. And it is time to get something done. Look, this will be a very slim majority, and this is an opportunity to figure out how we're going to work together. And I think sending that message as Democrats who will be in the minority, that there is a willingness to come together and to try to do what's right by the American public. Look, I always liked, this is a Steny Hoyer line. I liked where he would say the title representative is also a job description. And that means represent your people at home. You are not a party person above all else. You are an American. You are a representative of your district, and keep that in mind. Do what's right for our people at home and get the job done. It's really no more complicated than that.
Mark Schauer, same question to you, to your Democratic colleagues and the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate in the 119th Congress. What would you tell Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer?
I think it would be to look for opportunities for compromise and on their priorities, but make sure they're representing, to Cheri's point, the interests and of the American people and of their constituents. I thought earlier in this webinar about my experience as a member of 111th when President Obama's first 2 years, we had the trifecta, lost the 60 vote majority when Ted Kennedy died. We passed the Affordable Care Act. Fred, you remember that, under budget reconciliation, and how difficult that was to find the votes even within the Democratic majorities in both the House and Senate to get that done. And so I think there could have been an opportunity, thinking about that example, for the Republican Party and Republican members to, Fred, I'm not saying that you did not, but to have influence over those policy outcomes. The Democrats ended up going it alone, in my view, because we had to at that point. And I think Democrats ought to think about that and examples and rely on folks like Steny and others that have been there as a reminder of one-on-one relationships. Fred, you modeled that with my good friend John Dingell and so many others, and just build those relationships, find opportunities, and keep the interests and concerns of all of your constituents first and foremost.
So Fred Upton, he mentioned your name. We'll give you a chance to respond and offer your thoughts.
Well, I think all four of us came from swing districts. For me, I had 25 elections, contested elections, and was 25-0. And, as I've sat out not quite 2 years now of the Congress, is like, what are these folks doing or not doing that are still there? It was the most ineffective Congress we've ever had. Fewer enacted bills, just awful stuff with nothing done. My advice was quit kicking the can down the road. We know what the issues are. Let's work together to get things done, and actually do that. You'll build a stronger majority, I think, down the road, but you need to listen. I mean, the one issue, and I'll just go back to Mark on what he said, I thought the Obama team missed an opportunity to work with Republicans early on. I was friends with Rahm Emanuel. He knew that. I was friends with Steny. They just missed an opportunity to really do some things. I mean, he was a quite popular president. He won re-election big time, but they really could have done more with a little bit more reach out, which they didn't do. Now, I don't know we'll see what Trump says. I remember his first inaugural speech when it was like in your face. So we'll be watching on January 20th real carefully what happens. But they got to get their act together. This is ridiculous. They got some talented people that are there. And for some on either side, Republican or Democrat, they have to break away maybe a little bit from their strong-armed to try and get things done. So we'll see. It'll be a real fascinating thing to watch for me from the ski slopes in January.
And maybe passing a budget on time, which I don't mean you guys, but Congress hasn't done since 1996 when we had divided government. So that was my question to you in terms of whether it's Mike Johnson, whoever is the Speaker of the House, and to whoever is the Senate Republican leader. Reid Ribble, what would be your advice to your Republican leadership in Congress next year?
Yeah, to whoever is the Speaker of the House, my advice to them would be to allow the House to vote and to let the House work its will. I mean, we just had an election and we all say we have to trust the American people. Well, these are the elected representatives, so let's trust them. And the people from Northwest Illinois and from Michigan, whether the Republicans or Democrats, their voters have a right to be heard. And so I would advise them to let the House vote and vote often. I completely reject this idea that there's a hard vote to take in the House of Representatives. That hard votes don't exist. They only exist if you don't know what your people want. And that means if you're communicating with your voters back home, you're always going to know how to vote. And on the Senate side, I would advise whoever's going to be the new majority leader, whether it's John Cornyn or John Thune, to open the rules up over there so that place can function. I mean, the leadership has had the thumb on virtually everything in the U.S. Senate, and they really can't get hardly anything done. And so let's let the will of the voters be expressed through their elected representatives in the House and Senate, and let the chips fall where they will. And if they do that, you will build bigger majorities because it just works.
In our remaining minute, we'll call this a abbreviated special orders in case I missed anything or any of you want to have a final thought. The floor is yours.
I like what Reid Ribble just said. I think that would be really great to see.
To all of you. Go ahead.
I can remember Jerry Solomon, a respected member from New York, coming to the House floor complaining about closed rules almost every day. They need to open the process up, have open rules, obviously amendments that are germane. But as Reid said, let people vote. That's what you're going there for. If you don't want to cast a tough vote, don't go. Don't run for election.
Exactly.
Agree.
Fred Upton, where are you, by the way?
I'm in St. Joe, Michigan.
It looks great behind you.
I'm playing golf this afternoon, the first time.
In Michigan in November, you're golfing?
It's a beautiful day here.
Yeah.
Wow.
Climate change.
It is gorgeous here in Washington. Hey, this has been really terrific. On behalf of the former members of Congress Association and the Congressional Study Group, I want to thank Representative Cheri Bustos, Democrat from Illinois, Reid Ribble, Republican of Wisconsin, Mark Schauer, Democrat of Michigan, and of course, Fred Upton, also from Michigan, a Republican. To all of you, we appreciate your time and insights. Enjoy your day. Look forward to checking in with you as this process continues to unfold. Thank you all.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.